Don't limit yourself to saving money. I first said those words when I was already around 80 years old. But the truth is, it took me almost an entire lifetime to understand what they really mean. If you were sitting in front of me now, you might expect me to teach you how to save, how to store, how to protect yourself from the future. But I cannot do that, because that exact mindset cost me years I will never get back. When I was young, I was afraid, not of today's hunger, but of tomorrow's. So I began to save everything I could, every coin, every small gain, as if that alone would save me. And for a while, I truly believed it. The sound of coins falling into a jar gave me a false sense of control, as if I were building security. But there is something you only understand when you have lived long enough to look back. The more I saved, the less I lived. I turned down experiences, avoided risks, said no to life, all in the name of a future that never arrived the way I imagined. And it was only many years later, on a quiet night, staring at empty hands despite everything I had accumulated, that I understood something no one had ever taught me. Saving money may protect your body for a while, but it can imprison your mind forever. At that moment, I was not yet a monk. I was just someone beginning to realize that I had confused security with fear, and that perhaps, just perhaps, I had been living the wrong way all along. I remember a man because, in many ways, I was that man. I lived in a small village, and every day I would sit beneath the same tree, staring at the horizon as if the future would appear from it. I told myself that one day I would start a business, that one day I would find stability, that one day my life would truly begin. But that one day became the place where I hid all my inaction. The people around me first laughed, then they stopped, because they began to see something I was not yet ready to face. I wasn't waiting for the right moment. I was avoiding action. Meanwhile, life moved on. My family felt the weight of my absence even when I was physically there. My partner worked, carried what little we had, and I carried only ideas. Ideas that never put food on the table, never brought peace into our home. But there was one night that broke something inside me. My grandson, with tired eyes and a fragile body, came close and asked something simple. "Grandpa, do we have bread?" And in that moment, the silence of the house answered before I could. There was no bread, no rice, nothing. Only the weight of years spent living inside my own mind. That was when I understood something no philosophy had ever taught me before. Dreaming is not wrong, but using dreams as a refuge to avoid action, that is a quiet way of destroying your own life. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of hunger, but because for the first time, I clearly saw who I had become. Someone who stored intentions the same way he stored money, waiting for them to grow on their own. And it was there, in that discomfort, that something inside me began to change. The next morning, I did something I had avoided for years. I went out to work. The sun was harsh, the ground was dry,
and my hands, which had only known plans, finally touched reality. I carried weight, I sweated, I felt pain, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about the future. I was simply trying to survive the present. At the end of the day, I returned home with a few coins, not much, almost insignificant. But when my grandson looked at me, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was about presence, about action. For weeks, months, I continued, working, getting tired,
repeating. And soon, I noticed something no one tells you when they say, make money. Money comes in and goes out. Comes in and goes out. And often, it leaves faster than it arrives. Food ran out. Problems remained. The roof still leaked. And inside me, a new unease began to grow. If working just to survive wasn't enough, and saving felt impossible, then what truly creates stability? It was then, on an ordinary day, overhearing a simple conversation in the village, that something stayed with me. Whoever saves money is safe. And for the first time, it seemed to make sense. That night, I took a small glass jar, placed my first coins inside, and heard that sound, dry, metallic, clink. And something inside me calmed. I thought, now I'm building my tomorrow. But what I didn't know was that the jar wasn't just holding money. It was beginning to hold a new illusion. Over time, that jar began to fill, coin by coin, sound by sound, and every clink felt like proof that I was finally in control of my life. I started giving up simple things, new clothes, full meals, small moments of joy, all for that jar, all for a future that, in my mind, was being built inside it. My family had less, lived with less, while I convinced myself that this was wisdom, that today's sacrifice would guarantee tomorrow's peace. Until one day, I took all that money to the market, placed my savings on the table with pride, and told the vendor what I wanted to buy. It felt like I was finally harvesting what I had planted. But he simply looked at me, counted the coins, and shook his head. Prices had risen. Everything I had saved for months now bought less than half of what I expected. And in that moment, something inside me quietly collapsed. I went home with less than I had imagined, but with an understanding worth more than all that money. The world does not wait for you. Time does not preserve value, and whatever you try to hold too tightly will eventually slip away. In the philosophy I would only come to understand years later, there is a principle called impermanence. Nothing stays, everything changes, everything flows. And that day, I realized I had been trying to make money something it was never meant to be. Static, safe, permanent. Saving money without understanding the nature of life is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through. And for the first time, I began to suspect that it wasn't about saving. It was about understanding the flow. After that quiet collapse, something inside me finally opened, not as an immediate answer, but as an emptiness that began to ask questions. At that time, I was not yet a monk, but it was during this period that I met an old traveler, someone who carried almost nothing and yet seemed to have everything. There were across a lightness in him I had never seen before. I told him my story, spoke about the work, the money, the jar, the frustration, and he simply listened, in silence, as if he detailed before our finished. Then he told me something that, at the time, I didn't fully understand, but that changed the direction of my life. He said, "You are treating money as an end, when it should only be a means. And everything that becomes an end begins to imprison you." I fell silent, because for the first time, someone wasn't talking about earning or saving, but about relationship, about how I was relating to it. That was when you introduced me, without complex words, to a principle I would later recognize as part of the Buddhist path: detachment. Not in the sense of rejecting things, but in not becoming dependent on them. He explained that everything in life must flow. Still water rots. Air that doesn't move suffocates. And money, when it does not flow, also loses its purpose. In that moment, something finally made sense. It wasn't about having little or much. It was about not interrupting the movement of life out of fear. It was about using, transforming, allowing what comes to you to continue its path, creating more life. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't money that was limiting me. It was my attachment to it, my fear disguised as prudence. It was there, in that simple encounter, that I began to understand that living is not about accumulating. It is about participating in the flow. After that meeting, I didn't return home with answers. I returned with restlessness. And sometimes, that is what truly begins a transformation. I looked at the little money I still had, and for the first time, I didn't see security, nor fear. I saw possibility, and that changed the way I started to act. Instead of saving every coin with anxiety, I began to observe, to think, and to use it, not impulsively, but with intention, with awareness, like someone who understands that each small decision can create something beyond the immediate moment. That's when I had a simple idea, almost insignificant. But ideas, when put into motion, carry a power that idle money never will. I used part of what I had to buy a few chickens. Nothing grand, nothing impressive, just a beginning. At first, it seemed like very little. An egg here, another there. But something different was happening. For the first time, money was no longer being hidden. It was being transformed. It was coming back, multiplied by life itself. We ate some of the eggs, sold others, and with that, we bought more chickens. And without even noticing, it began to grow. Not fast, not easy, but in a living, organic, real way. And something inside me began to grow as well. It wasn't just money. It was the feeling of participation, of creation, of no longer fighting against life, but walking with it. It was during that time that I understood one of the deepest lessons I carried into my 100th year. Money sitting still is accumulated fear, but money in motion, guided by awareness, becomes life-expanding. And for the first time, I was no longer trying to protect the future. I was building something that could exist within it. Now, at 100 years old, when I look back at everything I've lived, I realize that money was never the center of the story. It was only the test. Many ask me what the secret was to living so long, and I always say it was never about the years. It was about how I used each phase of my life, especially after I understood that trying to control the future is one of the greatest illusions a person can carry. I've seen people accumulate wealth and die empty. I've seen others with almost nothing live with a fullness that cannot be bought. And that taught me something no coin ever could. The value of life has never been in how much you keep, but in how much you allow it to flow through you. On the Buddhist path, we learn that attachment is the root of suffering, and this does not apply only to people or possessions. It includes ideas, like the idea of security. Because when you cling too tightly to what if, you stop living the now. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't tell myself, save more money. I would say, learn to use what you have better, not only to survive, but to create, to grow, to generate life around you. Because in the end, the money you keep can disappear, its value can change, the world can turn, but what you build with it, that remains in ways you may not immediately see. And that is why today, if you were sitting in front of me, I would repeat with the calm of someone who has watched time pass completely, do not limit yourself to saving money. Learn to let life flow through it, because living in fear of losing is slowly, never truly living. If this story gave you a new way to see life,
subscribe to the channel, because here you won't find just ideas, you'll find transformation.